vibes, brothers and sisters. Welcome to Bro Sanchez TV with your host, Bro Sanchez. Today's presentation is part one of a series of videos where we will be uncovering the mysteries of the Hellenic period. And I will be sharing research that will explain how the foundations of government and mind control were laid on top of the two pillars of science and religion. In order to decipher the mystery, we must first start on the foundation of all science and religion, which is cosmology. This leads us into the topic of Claudius Ptolemy, who was one of the founding fathers of early Hellenic cosmological concepts. There were other Hellenes who contributed to early Hellenic concepts prior to Ptolemy, but we'll discuss those later. The reason we want to focus on Ptolemy first is because Ptolemy introduced the foundation of heliocentrism based on the fact that he created space. Many of us are told that Ptolemy's model is geocentric. Indeed, it is geocentric, meaning that the earth is at the center. It still is a Hellenic-based cosmology based on the fact that life exists within space. Prior to Ptolemy's model, earlier cosmologies had no concept of space. Early cosmologies had a concept of a primordial sea, what we call the ether today. And the ether is said to be that which fills all spaces. Therefore, the ether cannot coexist with space. So the creation of Ptolemy's model introduced space and got rid of the ether, even though it is still geocentric. Ptolemy introduced the foundation of heliocentrism based on the fact that he created space. What we call space today was called hell by the Hellenes. It was also referred to as the bottomless pit, and it was a place that many Hellenes called the underworld, or the place that the soul journeys through upon death. The Hellenes were known for fear-based spiritual systems and misinterpretations of nature based upon ignorance. The Hellenic concept of the grave was the bottomless pit, which was literally a dark void where you just fell for eternity. It was a free fall for eternity, and this was the Hellenic grave. Now, when you think of the modern heliocentric cosmology, we can still see this same Hellenic concept, being that all of life within the heliocentric universe sits within a bottomless pit that we call space. And everything is falling away from the point of singularity by a force called gravity. The root word of gravity is grave. What I'm pointing out to you is that modern heliocentrism is identical in its concepts to the same concepts that were being taught during the Greco-Egyptian time, or the time of Ptolemy, what we call the Hellenistic period. The modern universe is based upon gravity or gravity. During the time when religious leaders were government officials, gravity would have been associated with the grave, that which pulls you down into the ground and into the underworld. And again, Hellenes taught that upon entering the bottomless pit, that one would free fall for eternity. This is the exact same concept we're giving for space. None of these concepts are true. They are all based in mythology, and these are fear-based concepts that lay the foundation for government. When egotistical men decided that they wanted to be saviors for humanity, they realized that humanity had nothing to be saved from. So they then realized that they had to create a problem or a chaotic situation so that there will be a need for saviors. So part of this series, we're going to get into the rise of the first pharaoh, which marks the rise of the God concept and what we call God consciousness in Africa. We're going to solve the mysteries of early Christianity in Kush and Kemet. But before we can do any of this, we have to start with Claudius Ptolemy, because all of what we know of as cosmology or cosmogony is founded upon the cosmological concepts that were being taught during the Hellenistic period. So in order to understand the role of Ptolemy in Egypt, first let's take a look at some of the ancient cosmology that predates the Hellenistic concepts. So one of the earliest conceptions of the cosmos during the pre-Hellenic time is right here on the right of this collage. That is the Hebrew cosmos. This is a conception of the first 7 heavens. Keep in mind that during this time it was said to be several heavens, but in the cosmology they normally stopped at the number 7 because these were the 7 ethereal layers that the ancestors had became familiar with, and they had come to a point of understanding the makeup of these 7 ethers. There were said to be more ethers, but in my research I see that a lot of ancients only fully understood the first 7. So 7 is symbolic of completion. It represents a checkpoint before there's a recycling, like 7 days of the week before the week reset. After these 7 layers, there's a gradual shift, like going from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school, where you start over again and become a freshman on a higher level. So these ethereal layers were set up like a university, hence the word universe. And each one are houses for different levels of consciousness for different beings of light. So the word 7 is also related to the word several. It doesn't mean an ending, it just means a new beginning. Like at the end of 7 days, we get a new week. In a lot of cultures, the heavens were called the ethers. And in Egyptian culture, they were called the netters because they resemble nets. They're called ethers because they represent the layers in between realities. Just like the word either represents a transition in between 2 polarities. If you say, I want apples or either oranges, it's a transitional word dealing with a transitional barrier. We also see that the word ether is in the word tether because all of the ethers are tethered together. In fact, the word together are the 2 words tug, ether. In the mythical depiction of Vishnu churning the Milky Sea, it's actually a conception of the one that churns the ether or that turns the ethereal pole to stir up the primordial sea. The primordial sea houses all of the elements of creation. So the churning of the ethereal sea stirs up the elements to keep them blended in marriage and unison to make up the physical creation. Without this stirring, the elements would settle in their respected layers based upon the laws of density. So life is truly a smoothie that is being churned at the point of singularity. So the conception of Vishnu churning the Milky Sea, if you imagine the conception from a top-down view, the Milky Sea of Vishnu became interpreted to us today as the Milky Way. In earlier conceptions of the cosmos, there was a great mother goddess. Her breast symbolized the sun and the moon, and as she spun around in her ballerina style, that was a way of churning the Milky Sea. And it was a mythological way of explaining the circuit of the sun and moon around the North Pole being the Great Mother. That spiral that the Great Mother created also became interpreted to us today as the Milky Way, being that her breast symbolized the circuit. Galaxies are all born because at the center of all galaxies, as we've been taught by heliocentrists, there's a black hole, which is a scientific way of saying divine womb. But the black holes are always linked with fear, destruction, and chaos, whereas in ancient time they were linked to balance and recycling. So the Great Mother was replaced with the black hole at the center of the Milky Way. She's the one making the spiral of life. And the Great Mother was basically a personification of an ethereal pole, a cosmic boulevard, a highway, if you will, where energy is going up and down at the same time, creating a hyperboloid or a Coke bottle shape. So this is the whole thing about we liking women with the Coke bottle shape. She's shaped like an hourglass. And we can see this symbolism all over the place. Here's a collage just to show you a few manifestations of the Great Mother. In the ancient cosmology, all of the heavens revolved around a central axis that was personified by a mother. This became the word galaxy or galaxy, which is another way of saying the girl's axis. So I find it strange that a lot of globalists won't accept the idea of ancient flat earth cosmology, but they accept the idea of a flat Milky Way, which is a plagiarization based upon the ancient flat earth truth. The North Pole was said to be an ethereal pole that's responsible for the recycling of the material world. So since the body is composed of the material world, this ethereal pole is often linked to the cosmic journey and the accepting and transitioning of our energy in the afterlife.